This is Growing Bonsai, my name is Jelle and this is a Chinese juniper of the variety Itoigawa. How do you handle an overgrown juniper bonsai? This tree has been allowed to grow for the whole season. Now you can see there's very long runners here on the top. The bottom hasn't grown all that much and there's a lot of that stuff in there. Itoigawa is known for its very nice fine foliage that quite easily grows in these very nice compact pads. However, if you allow it to shoot, it does create these long runners. Now there's 3 reasons why this tree is overgrown and why I've allowed it to grow so much over summer that it's now just one big bush again instead of a bonsai. First reason is just in general I want this tree to grow. As you can tell here, the trunk is not all that thick. Allowing all the foliage to expand, grow lots of energy and sit in full sun over summer means that this base fattens up a lot. Now there's one branch here in the back that I've actually decided this is going to be a sacrifice, and this branch I need to actually mark. I'm not going to cut it off, I'm going to let it grow maybe a meter tall so that the trunk fattens a lot more. But in general I wanted this tree to grow out, I wanted the trunk to get thicker, I wanted the main branches to get a little bit more solid, and therefore I've allowed these branches to grow out. However, this is more than I'd normally allow to do, and normally I have not so much that stuff in there. So what are the other reasons that I allowed it to grow? Well, the second reason is that this spring I had a Spidermite infection. These trees were getting weak, there were some yellow patches in it, and I decided, you know what, why don't I just allow the tree to grow a little bit? That's also what has caused the massive dieback here on the inside and all these little branchlets to die off. Now the tree has nicely recovered from it. I did use predatory mites to get rid of the Spidermite infection, but now with fall approaching, I feel it is time to clean up. Because if I don't clean up now, these lower branches might actually weaken so much over winter that they can't catch up in spring. So the top needs to be reduced significantly. And of course the third reason why you might allow these branches to run long, and in this case it's not really relevant for me, so maybe I only have 2 reasons, but the third would be that you allow these to grow longer because you want to extend the branches, you want to reshape your tree, and you say I'm going to build up my top more, I'm going to build this pad more, and then you just use one of these to grow out. That of course is also good to do. A fourth potential reason that I could think of, just general health, right? If your tree is in general weak, so not just from a Spidermite infection, then these runners will aid enormously in re-strengthening your tree. But that's also not the case here. Now, what is really nice about these runners, if you don't have enough trees, or if you just in general like propagation, these make excellent cuttings. So if you are pruning your bonsai, keep in mind, these runners, in fall, collect them, pot them up, and in spring you might have new bonsai. Now what are the steps to get this back into shape? Well, first of all, I of course need to clear out all this debris that has accumulated over the season. These are all old branchlets, they have died off, they're just cluttering up the inner space, but they also reduce the sunlight that reaches the branches and therefore it reduces backbudding, and overall this pad weakens by having lots of debris in here. But you can see I can just shake this out at this time of year and everything that's weak will just come off and fall out. This already increases a lot the potential for the tree to backbud. Then, once I've done that, I have to go through the whole tree and check the wiring. A year and a half ago this tree was last wired and there's wires everywhere, but it is not completely biting in yet. However, I'm going to remove it all because after pruning I'm going to wire out the whole tree so that it's nice and open. Now let's look at the wire and see how it has bitten in over the last year and a half, 2 years. So you can also see, well, this is the point that you really should start removing the wire, otherwise it will bite in come spring. Now if you look here at the trunk, you see the bark here has cracked open. And this is actually a really good sign because that means that my ambition to fatten up the trunk has worked. But this is cracking, peeling, and it's a good sign that the tree has been growing lots. Now besides just general thickening of the trunk, there's another reason why I want the trunk to fatten up, and that is what you see here. These branches were cut off during the initial styling a few years ago. I want this living tissue to really swell up around the gins and the tiny little cherry. You can actually see here this has happened. This looks now quite natural and not man-made anymore as a wound. And this needs to happen on all these spots where originally I removed branches, and I want real clear lifelines to flow around these dead partitions. And it really is not difficult, right? This removal of debris is really just going with your fingers in between the branches. Look for some yellowing foliage as well, take that out. Everything that is not healthy and green, you take out. Now these sort of areas where you have yellowing of the scales on the main branches is normal. This is just the aging of the branch, so don't pluck this off. But here you see branchlets that as a whole are starting to get yellow, and you take all of these out. Weaker growth growing down you take out, and basically you just open the pads this way, removing everything that is weak. And of course I'm doing this the wrong order. You should start at the top, getting all the debris out so that everything that falls down in your round as you go down also gets removed completely from the tree. Just take 10 minutes to remove most of it. During the pruning and the unwiring also a lot of the debris will come out. But doing this now initially will greatly aid in providing an overview because it isn't blocking your view anymore. Next step. I prefer to now give it a quick prune. And what am I going to prune? Well, I'm going to prune these very long runners, and on a branch by branch basis I'm going to check how much foliage is on there and how much do I want to keep. So if you just take one of these branches and then you slide your hand in between, you can see how much foliage is in there. You see these long whips here in the back? You don't really need them, but also here at the edges you have some overgrown foliage. That overgrown foliage will thin out later on, but now I can just take out all these long whips, and that will facilitate in the unwiring and cleaning out of the wire of these old branches. I said I was going to keep this as a sacrifice to fatten up the trunk. Important to mark it so I don't prune it now. And here I'm not going to be very careful with the foliage because it's just for now that I see, okay, all this foliage is part of a sacrifice. And a quick recap, of course, of pruning juniper foliage. You don't just prune to shape. You always take the strongest branch, you dive in and you look on the inside somewhere for the base of this branch, and then you look for a side branch and just take the whole extension out if you don't need the extension. Just like that. And now this whole area has been pruned back. You have all this other foliage sitting here, and there's another small runner that I can just clip out so you get a smooth surface again. And as said, this makes a perfect cutting. You just remove the lower part of foliage and you just stick it into the ground up to that level. And then by spring you should get roots on there. What you see here is the final part of the central trunk. So basically this is the tip of the apex with a very strong whip. But what you also see is that over the years it has been pruned back to this point a few times, and therefore some clumping has occurred. Which is why this year I've let it grow, and in the back there is a little side branch, and I'm going to show you in a second. But I can now prune this whole thing off and just use one of the side branches to continue on with. Now this whole clump is gone, and this branch I can now wire out later on to be my new leader and apex. And with that I've got a nicer transition here. And you can see here down below I've done this before, and at some point I'm going to go all the way down into the tree and say I'm going to take a new leader further down, because at some point also this will cause a swelling. But for now this still works. And naturally, if you're pruning this sort of extension growth, you don't prune off everything that's green. Ideally you just go all the way into the base and you look where are the healthy side branches to this whip, and then you cut in the brown, remove that, but around it there's still foliage that takes over, and this will then eventually clean up the whole pad. So here the same thing, you just go in, you say okay, I'm going to go down, I'm not going to remove everything unless I want to remove everything, but see whether you need more, and then you just leave some of it. In this case I want it all gone, so I cut it off at the base. As I am working on this tree, I'm actually changing my opinion about this video. I think this is going to be a two-part video. This one is just going to be cleaning it up, because if I look at this tree and I look at the inside, I see that all the debris and all the overgrown branches have caused all the inner foliage to get really, really weak. So if I now prune back too much and I manipulate the branches too much and I unwire and rewire, there is a risk of all these inner branches that I really want to use in the new styling dying off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove maybe half of the outer crown. And I'm not just going to cut half off, I'm going to thin it out so that it becomes more translucent, there's more light on the inside. Then I'm going to wait, and late in winter, as spring is coming, that's when I'm going to clean it out further. I'm going to unwire. That's also the ideal moment to take this out of the pot and replant it just after all the wiring has been done. so that in late spring I can show you the second phase of this rejuvenation. So what I'm now going to do, you've seen I've left a few of these little runners in place. I'm now going to go in and every single tuft I'm going to check branch by branch, what can I remove? And instead of just removing a little bit of foliage on every single branch, I'm going to take one of these branches, I'm going to check them and I'm going to say, well, okay, here there's a split into two. And then there's a side branch. Let's cut back to that side branch and leave the rest. So we're quite high up in the crown, and what you see here is this whole cluster of branches, right? And this is the sort of foliage that I really would like to cut back to. Here you see this little runner, that's really good because that means that this part has built strength. I can now remove that and encourage this to start growing. Same here with the other little runner. Prune that back. But to encourage it further, everything that's happening here below, further along the same branch, right? There's a branch starting here, going up, then that cluster of foliage that we've just pruned. Then it continues on, and this is a side branch, and this would be a side branch that I want to cut back to, but it really is too weak right now. But what we can see here is we have this whole cluster. Here's an old pruning scar, so I've pruned it once here, and this foliage was encouraged to grow. That's now really strong. If I now look at a branch like this, it's actually not just one branch, right? It is a whole cluster of branches. And I can now say, okay, I'm going to remove, well, first of all, one of these very heavy ones, this one, for instance. Take that one out. Now it's already a lot lighter. This is also not a very strong one, but it is nice far in the back. So I'm going to just reduce the foliage, just like that. Now this is a lot thinner, right? The one here on top, we do the same thing. Prune it back a little bit. This will make this part very open, and it encourages these branches further in the back to grow. And do the same here. Look at where is the strongest tuft and take that out. The strongest one. Oh. Take it out. Thin it. So this way, this area is now opening up a lot, and over winter, in sun, the inner foliage will strengthen, and then in winter, once spring is coming, that's when I look at the foliage again. And then I can probably wire it out and thin it back to these inner foliage masses. Easy peasy, just do this throughout the crown. Of course, you can always start with these little tufts that are already pushing, right? And go deep into the crown and there remove some of the foliage, leaving only the inner branches. That will already open it up a lot. Keep in mind you might need the extension at some point, so don't cut off extension that you still need. This may cause the tree to respond in stress foliage creation, which is why you actually should prune earlier in the year and not let it go this overgrown. This really is a mistake on my care. Our inner foliage is really great, but keep in mind that you don't want to keep everything. If you look here, this is a place where it's been pruned a few times, and now you see lots and lots of backbuds occurring, but that leads to clumps. And then I like to thin this out to just 1 or 2 branches, ensuring that we don't get clumping, bulge forming and things like that. So I just pull out some of these additional whips that have formed, so that it opens up more. And these little backbuds here, let's see what I can clip this whole thing off. There we go. Then we have a side branch, and maybe we don't need this because we have a back branch here, and I can take this out as well, opening it up. And now I've avoided the bulging clumping a little bit. So you see that from the front there's still a lot of foliage here in this area to build the rest of the tree with. If you see a pad like this, don't just assume that everything belongs together, because if I open it up, you see there's actually multiple branches here. There's a foliage area here, and these branches are pretty bare on the inside. Fortunately, there's a young branch here that could take over time, and here as well. But this doesn't have any side branches in this area, so be quite conserved this pruning, because otherwise you prune all of this away. Luckily, this does have enough foliage to fill it up, but I don't want to make that choice right now. I'll do that when I'm pruning. I'll do that when I'm wiring. So I'm going here into this foliage pad and say, okay, 3 branches, the rest goes. So a lot is gone. And this creates just this end that now gets more
light and more air. And hopefully here on the inside, this foliage can now start to push as well. The same here. I'm going to go back in and say, okay, how do I reduce this?
Now, I think roughly a third of the foliage is gone. The tree is a lot opener, although from the frontal view you won't be able to see that. But from the bird's eye view you see there's a lot more air and space now in the tree, allowing all these inner branches to get stronger. Also these lower branches will now get more sun because it gets through the canopy. What I now hope that happens is all the infrastructure that was built to really support all this foliage is still there. The roots are still pumping, the branches are still pushing water. That means that all these inner branches, all these inner growing tips now get a boost. We still have, as said, another month, maybe 1.5 months before it really gets too cold. But as long as temperatures are over 10 Celsius, say about 50 Fahrenheit, then the tree will grow. So this overwinter will strengthen all these branches. You can see all these branches have grown up a lot. I can then wire these down and cut back to this inner foliage that is now sitting on all the back buds. If I cut this now, I am afraid that I'm weakening it too much. Here also the same thing, right? All these branches have grown up. And if I bend them open, then you see all this inner foliage that now gets strengthened. Of course, you could now also wire out, right? There's no problem with wiring in September or October. I just have a lot of other trees to prune. I therefore take the opportunity to now prune all of my junipers. And then later in winter, when I have time, say over Christmas break, I'll take some wire and I start unwiring, rewiring, and then it is all done. When spring hits and everything starts growing, I'll plop it into a bigger pot. Actually, no, and in spring when everything starts growing, I'll take it out of the pot, I'll repot it into this pot, and it's all done again. And then for the next 2 or 3 years, it's probably done. And for the next 2 or 3 years, it probably doesn't need a major overhaul again. Now, with that, this tree is done for the next couple of months. I am going to sign off with just a little video reminding you on how to propagate juniper. That's right there. And my latest video is just right there. See you next time. This was Jelle, growing bonsai. Keep doing that.